morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, plan of attack. President Biden set to address the nation with a new strategy to stop the spread of the coronavirus.
There will be new components that sure will, of course, impact people across the country, but we're also all working together to get the virus under control.
More of the president's new six-point approach, what it may include, what it could mean for you, and how it could challenge laws in several states. 1-2 punch, a flood watch in effect this morning for some of the storm-ravaged neighborhoods still reeling from Hurricane Ida. We'll take you to the Northeast, where they braced for another storm and hoped they would be spared. In power, chaos in Afghanistan, protests in the streets as the Taliban announces its new government. What we know about the newly named all-male leadership, plus the latest on the efforts to get Americans out of the country. And kickoff concerns. It's the Super Bowl champions against America's team tonight, but there's a bigger matchup off the field as the NFL season begins. A look at how the league and its teams are tackling COVID-19. Sounded like I knew what I was talking about there, didn't I?
I'm sure you'll be up late tonight watching
America's team, right? Yeah,
which team is that?
Yeah, exactly. I know now. I didn't when I first looked at that. It's the Cowboys, right? Okay, great. We begin, though, this morning with the White House's new push to control the current wave of coronavirus cases.
President Biden is expected to announce a plan later today to help stop the spread of the Delta variant and to boost vaccinations. An average of 140,000 Americans are testing positive every day right now. Well, it appears daily case numbers are going down nationwide. Health experts warn this number could tick back up again, especially as children head back to school. There is a number experts in the White House want to see tick back up. This number here, vaccinations. Right now, America is giving out about 826,000 doses a day. That number is higher than earlier this summer, but still may not be enough to get the contagious Delta variant under control. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now. So, Mike, first of all, give us a preview. What do we know about President Biden's plan to try and change the course of this pandemic?
Well, Joe, you remember it was just a couple months ago, around the 4th of July, the president was declaring independence from the virus, or at least something close to that. But then along came the Delta variant. And yes, we have seen cases started to tick down just a little bit. But within the past 2 weeks, we've seen some of the highest case rates across the country during the entirety of the pandemic. So we don't know much in terms of specifics just yet about what the president's going to unveil. But we do know the 6 broad categories of what is the White House is calling an all-levers approach to dealing with the pandemic. And it starts with some familiar themes, including vaccinating the unvaccinated. We know what an urgent task that has been. Then going to furthering protection for the vaccinated. We expect this will deal with booster shots and the plans to roll those out later this month. If you want to know why the president's giving the speech right now, it has to do with point number 3, keeping schools safely open. Already, we're seeing schools having to close that were just open for the school year. Now, some of the other points involve increasing testing and masking requirements, protecting our economic recovery, a really important focus for this president at this time, and then improving care for those who have COVID-19. When you look at what we're seeing across the country, especially in schools, as parents are sending their children back to schools, this is a major front-of-mind concern for the average American, and this is a moment in time that the president wants to make sure to the American people that they see him still dealing with this crisis that he had long hoped to put behind him.
Mike, let's take a closer look at one part of the plan, giving fully vaccinated Americans another shot. The World Health Organization is calling for wealthier countries to stop handing out boosters and instead help out struggling countries. So how's the White House responding to concerns that it's just too soon for boosters?
Well, what the White House has been consistent since they first discussed the booster plan last month is that this is not an either-or scenario, but a both-and scenario. They believe that they have enough supply both to give booster shots to Americans who need them, but also continue to be the arsenal of vaccines for the country, as the president has put it. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki yesterday laying this out.
From Senegal to South Africa to India, we've made significant investments in boosting global productions of COVID vaccines. At the same time, the president and this administration has a responsibility to do everything we can to protect people in the United States in this country. And as our health advisors have recommended additional booster shots, we are working to implement that. Our view is we can do both.
So the administration has worked very hard to make sure there is enough supply for all Americans and says, yes, that they can share that with the world later on. But the criticism from even some of our allies has been that because the U.S. has put such a premium on having enough supply, it has put other countries to the back of the list. They're not even able to reach out to these manufacturers themselves and get the supply. But that's why there is a global vaccine effort. There's just been questions about how successful it's been so far.
And of course, the global effort is so important to controlling all of these variants. Mike, while we have you, I want to ask you about something else. The White House pushing out several Trump administration appointees from their posts on military academy advisory boards. Tell us more about this and what led up to this decision.
So when we talk about presidential appointments, we often think of those that require Senate confirmation, cabinet offices and the like. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of board positions that the president has discretion to appoint. And former President Trump appointed quite a few of his political allies to some of them. And we saw just in the last few days now, some of those Trump allies speaking publicly when they received a letter from the White House head of personnel office, Catherine Russell, asking them to either resign their position or expect to be terminated. What the White House is saying is that they are considering that these positions should be based on merit, not on political affiliations. But some of those, including Sean Spicer, we've heard very clearly raising their objections. Spicer, who was on the board of one of these military academy visitor centers, says he is a veteran and he has the qualifications. But we're waiting to hear more from the White House about how this political fight will play out.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Kellyanne Conway, another name on that list. All right, Mike Memoli. Mike, thanks so much for your reporting.
Now let's get to COVID and kids returning to school, and even schools with a mask mandate in place face a midday hurdle that could put kids and staff in harm's way. Lunchtime, often in big cafeterias, some with poor ventilation. So the solution might be to take students outside. NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbella joins us now from Arlington, Virginia, where parents support this decision to take lunch outdoors. Heidi, good morning. So this is something we haven't talked about much. I mean, the focus has been on whether there are masks or not in schools. But even for these schools with masks, there are these risks. So how did they come to this solution? And so far, how's outdoor lunch going?
Yeah, Savannah, remember when you and I, all of the adults, refused to dine indoors before we were fully vaccinated? Well, that was with a less contagious variant. And so the principals here are saying, look, this was not a hard decision. We're just following the science, and we want our children to have as much fresh air as possible. Here's what the principal said.
It's going really well. We've had a great support from the community. We have parents who have asked to volunteer to help monitor lunches, which is one of the ways that we've been able to pull this off. The teachers have been fabulous and flexible while we work through these kinks the first few days with everyone back in the building and outside at lunch. The front office has been great managing the requests from parents to help volunteer. My assistant principal has been fabulous helping support the custodial staff. It really does take everybody to make this happen.
So this is the school in Arlington that has the smallest footprint, Savannah, and yet they're managing to do this. Here's what they do. It's not hard. They open these doors, the kids come out, they stagger the lunchtime, they put them all on blankets, on towels. The kids actually love it because sometimes mommy or daddy volunteer to come and eat lunch outdoors with them, and they're keeping kids safe in the meantime. This is one of the most important things that you can do because lunchrooms can be very dangerous if you're eating indoors, packed in with all of those respiratory droplets. You can't use the masks.
Heidi, you must be at an elementary school if we're at the phase where they're excited that mommy and daddy are there. So that's very sweet. Now, how are the parents who are coming, who are helping out, or who have kids there feeling about this new outside lunch policy?
Look, the parents here are pretty informed, and there was a big push behind this going back to the spring. They knew that the kids were going to be coming back, Delta virus or no Delta virus, with a transmissible virus in here. And so they've been pressuring the school. They say particularly in the middle schools, Savannah, these schools just weren't designed to have social distancing in the cafeteria. Here's what some of them said.
It came up that the kids were going to be eating together in the cafeteria indoors, and that the only mitigation plan was open windows. And so a number of the parents raised that as a significant concern, that we weren't comfortable with our kids eating together in the cafeteria, and really pushed to say we need an outdoor plan and we need it before school starts.
I think we need to educate our students, and I've taken the time to educate mine. I said we don't eat in restaurants indoors. Eating in the cafeteria is the same thing.
The real issue now, Savannah, is what other school districts would do. A number of school districts in this area are also trying to do this. Arlington has plans for every single school now to do this, but others are saying, look, we made our plans back in spring and it's hard to adjust. The parents are saying nonsense. This doesn't cost money. You just open the doors. You let the kids out.
Heidi, though, what happens in winter? I mean, when it's freezing outside. I grew up in San Diego where we ate outdoors year round, but it's obviously not the weather in December in Northern Virginia. What happens?
Well, look, they're not viewing this as a long-term issue. Right now, we have a lot of kids in this building, actually all of them, who cannot be vaccinated. Now, they're hoping that they can do this through the fall in this format. They'll think about sustainability and how to do it long-term. In the meantime, try to set some tents up, try to set up some outdoor structures. But for right now, they really don't need anything else, Savannah, and they're hoping that this can last just through the time when these children will be vaccinated so that they are in this moment protecting them and showing this flexibility. And another principal who I talked to said, I asked her, well, does this cost money? How are you going to do this? And she said, money? She laughed and she said, no, we just used our brains.
All right, Heidi Presbella, thank you so much.
For more on the pandemic, let's bring in Dr. Adrian Burrows. He's a family medicine physician and the CEO of CFP Physicians Group. Dr. Burrows, good to have you with us. So you're in hard-hit Florida, where most kids have been back in school for a few weeks now. And over the past month, COVID hospital admissions among children in the state reached a new pandemic high. So in your mind, what more needs to be done? What kind of mitigation measures do you want to see in schools to try and change course?
Well, I need our governor to wake up. Right now, Governor DeSantis is fighting the public health officials and the CDC on their recommendations, which are to make sure that children wear masks when they're in schools and appropriately social distance. Right now, if you're under the age of 12, you're not even eligible to have a vaccination. So we need to do what we can to keep our children safe and also to keep our teachers safe.
Let's look at another part of the country. Los Angeles is expected to become the first major school district to mandate coronavirus vaccines for eligible students. The district's meeting today to vote on the measure, which is expected to pass. I mean, what do you make of this? Do you think kids there then will still need to wear masks, too, if they're vaccinated? And what do you make of this policy?
Yes, and I think for people that may have some outrage regarding this, right now, vaccinations are required. If you have a child going to college, they have to have a meningitis vaccine. Some employers require their employees to have hepatitis B vaccine. So I'm in favor of making sure that there's vaccinations in place. And I think it will get some pushback, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to make it a safer environment for kids to be in. Until that's done, and probably while it's still going on because of the Delta variant being so contagious, they'll still have to wear masks.
And Dr. Burrows, what do you want to hear from President Biden today when he makes this big COVID announcement? What do you think needs to be done now to try and control the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that the administration needs to make sure that everybody's on the same page. The CDC is saying the same thing that Dr. Fauci is saying. It's the same thing that President Biden's going to say, which is that I want to hear them say that we are going to be instituting, more mask mandates, that federal employees are going to be recommended to be vaccinated, that they're going to support businesses that, encourage vaccination. Those are the steps that we need to do to try to stem this pandemic.
All right, Dr. Adrian Burrows, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Overnight across the Northeast, communities still reeling from last week's devastating storm got something they didn't need another storm.
Well, in the South, where hundreds of thousands are still without power, Hurricane Ida's deadly toll continues to grow. All this as Tropical Storm Mindy made landfall in the Florida Panhandle. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren joins us from Manville, New Jersey with more. Kristen, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Yeah, as the rain continues to come down here, this is an area that has just been on eggshells for the past 12 hours or so. You can see all the damage that Ida left behind. Now they've been bracing for this next round of storms, even as so many are still looking for help.
Overnight, Tropical Storm Mindy making landfall near the Florida Panhandle. Heavy rain and high winds creating rough surf, blowing this semi-truck off the road near Tallahassee. The storm's impact sweeping throughout the South, expected to bring possibly up to 6 inches of rain in some areas. Meanwhile, the devastating toll of Ida continues to be felt across the Northeast. New York City tapping into a new alert system for the latest storm. Mayor Bill de Blasio detailing the climate-driven rain response plan in light of Ida's aftermath.
And what we're going to be doing from now on is giving people information with a sense that we know how rapidly weather is changing now, like nothing we've ever seen before.
Residents in the hardest hit areas worried what the new weather will bring.
We're seeing this as a flood zone. I'm ready to go. I don't want to be in it again.
There's not a lot we could do to prepare for it. We could just pray that it's just going to be a rainstorm and that's it. There's not a lot to lose.
Leaders in New Jersey pushing for more federal aid.
In this small town, this is the 4th major storm that has devastated our town in 25 years. Our community needs help. We're not the only one, but we need help.
In the South, Hurricane Ida's devastation still growing.
I don't really have any words to say. It's just very heartbreaking. I don't know what we're going to do from here.
More than 80 have now died. Louisiana reporting 11 additional storm-related deaths from Ida. The lights are back on for some in the Bayou State. But more than 10 days after Ida made landfall, hundreds of thousands remain without power.
But we'll make it. We'll get through it. I don't mean to cry. But it's hard. It's a lot.
And a bit of a sigh of relief this morning. The rain's still coming down. We didn't see that big flash flooding, but this hasn't made it easy for cleanup. You can see house after house along this street, all of their worldly possessions out here on the curb, and some people not sure if they'll ever get back into these houses, guys.
Heartbreaking to hear, Ann-C. Kristen, thank you so much. Now for a look at where Mindy is going and what else is happening across the rest of the country, let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Bill Cairns is with us. Bill, good morning.
Hey, good morning. So let's start in the Northeast, because we went into yesterday thinking chance for isolated tornadoes, and we knew we were going to have some heavy rain. We weren't thinking that it was going to specifically be in those areas that were hit by Ida, and that's kind of exactly what happened. The heaviest rain overnight was in areas of the Poconos near Allentown, Pennsylvania, and then we had some pretty strong thunderstorms that went through Connecticut and that are now heading through Cape Cod. We even had a tornado warning at 4 in the morning. I'm sure a lot of people woke up by that just outside of Hartford. So you see right now, a lot of the heavy rain is kind of exiting, just some light stuff left around Philadelphia and Long Island. And the timing for today, from D.C. up to New York, there could be a scattered shower this afternoon, but the heavier stuff is going to remain over Providence and Boston, the Cape, and areas of Maine. It does not look heavy enough to be, flash flooding worthy wise. As far as Mindy goes, this thing quickly became a tropical storm and made landfall just to the southwest of Tallahassee yesterday afternoon and evening. And now we are watching this storm system affecting Savannah and Charleston. It's not a huge ordeal. The winds are only at 35 miles per hour, and even this is gone later this afternoon. So in the Northeast, I don't expect any damage today, and I don't expect any problems from Mindy either. And how about the heat? 95 Denver, 96 Salt Lake City, and heading into the weekend outlook, the Northeast dries out. Still a little rainy and wet in areas of the Northwest, but that's welcomed rain for the firefighters. But the heat is just relentless in the middle of the country. That's not a misprint. 101 near Wichita. And as we head into Saturday, nice little fall feel to it in the Northeast. And then the heat begins to build in the mid-Atlantic on Sunday and into Saturday afternoon. By the time we get to Sunday, near 90 in Washington, D.C., still in the 90s in the middle of the country. The only comfortable, coolerish type weather will be there in the northern plains and Great Lakes. So the bottom line is another summer weekend heading this way. Make your plans. The beach, the pool, the lake. All a big thumbs up, guys.
All right.
Good news.
Good weekend forecast.
Wish I had one of those things at my disposal here in New York City. It's still great. Thanks, Bill.
An inflatable.
All right, coming up, crisis in Kabul as dozens of Americans scramble to evacuate without troops on the ground in Afghanistan.
As of now, the Taliban are not permitting the charter flights to depart.
And the new developments this morning as more Americans are expected to leave Kabul today. New details as the situation unfolds. Next on Morning News Now. NBC News has learned that the first international passenger plane to leave Kabul since U.S. troops pulled out of Afghanistan will depart later today. According to two sources familiar with the matter, a flight carrying 200 people is expected to take off for Doha from Hamid Karzai International Airport. NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez is in Doha for us now. Raf, good morning. So this comes just a day after Secretary Blinken urged the Taliban to allow charter planes to leave Afghanistan, also after he had received criticism for not doing more. Has U.S. pressure paid off here, and could we see more planes leaving in the next few days?
Yeah, Savannah, the White House is certainly hoping that this is a vindication of their belief that it was possible to get U.S. citizens out of Afghanistan even after U.S. troops withdraw. As you said, that is a belief that they have taken a lot of heat from both Democrats and Republicans over. It's a belief that's been criticized abroad, but two sources familiar say we expect that later today a Qatari flight carrying 200 people, both Americans and foreign nationals, is going to take off from Hamid Karzai International and land here in Doha. Now, assuming that all goes smoothly, that would appear to show that the Taliban cooperation has been secured, that it is possible to get Americans through a Taliban-controlled airport, an airport that is threatened by ISIS-K, where we saw that suicide bombing a few weeks ago. But this is a big if. This is Afghanistan. The situation is very complicated. For weeks now, there has been quiet diplomacy running mainly through the Qataris to try to get Hamid Karzai International Airport up and running again. There have been a lot of issues, as you can imagine. Some of them are technical. How do you get the Taliban to safely operate a very complicated air traffic control system? But a lot of it to do with security. And Savannah, the question now is today's arrangement scalable? Is this the first of many flights, or is this a one-off exceptional arrangement to get this plane off the ground? That's what we're all waiting to see, Savannah.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, we know Blinken also held a virtual meeting with officials from around the world on the situation in Afghanistan when he took this tour of Ramstein Air Base in Germany. What's been the reaction to the Taliban's new caretaker government in that meeting?
Yeah, so the approach of the Western allies, led by the United States, has been effectively wait and see. Nobody is rushing to recognize this new Taliban government, but nobody is ruling that out either. Everybody understands there has to be some level of cooperation with the Taliban going forward. Secretary Blinken did note a number of what he called concerns about this new Taliban government. There are no women. There are people in that government who are on the FBI's most wanted list for terrorism charges. And this is not a unity government. This is entirely a Taliban government. Nobody from the old regime, no technocrats, nothing like that. The line Secretary Blinken has been using over and over again is the U.S. will judge this new Taliban regime by its actions, not by its words. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We will judge it and them by its actions. The international community has made clear its expectation that the Afghan people deserve an inclusive government. The Taliban seek international legitimacy and support. Any legitimacy, any support will have to be earned.
Savannah, what I thought was really interesting, Secretary Blinken used that line in an interview with an Afghan journalist, and the Afghan journalist pushed back, saying, we've already seen a lot of the Taliban government's actions. They're beating women protesters, they're arresting journalists in the street, and they are segregating classrooms between men and women. Savannah?
All right, Raf Sanchez, thank you so much.
Hundreds of thousands of refugees have been trying to flee Afghanistan since the Taliban took over. For many, that means escaping the new regime over land, not by air. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter is at the border with neighboring Pakistan and has this report on the desperate situation unfolding there.
We're at Torkham border crossing. I'm on the Pakistani side, and I want to show you something just happened. An ambulance just pulled up on the Pakistani side, and in that ambulance, they just put that wooden coffin. And couple guys just climbed in. I'm not sure exactly what's happening. Mostly what we're seeing at this border, trucks like this, I'm just going to take you over here, going normal trade kind of back and forth. We are seeing, though, pedestrians come across, and over here is where people are actually crossing from Afghanistan to Pakistan, getting checked here by the Pakistanis. You've got a lot of people in wheelchairs. You've got a lot of women, a lot of kids coming through. We were able to speak with one of the one of the Taliban guards on the Afghanistan side earlier. He said so far they have about 20 people who need serious medical attention who are coming over, and they're really not letting in anyone the Pakistanis won't accept. So that's people with official documents. That's people with Pakistani visas, with SIV visas, who these Pakistani guards are actually going to let in. Now, we're going to try to catch up with some of these people up ahead. This is a big processing center, and try to figure out, where they're from in Afghanistan, why they're crossing. And it's heart-wrenching. There are hundreds of people waiting back there. They are so close to getting over to the side. Families over there, children over there. And it doesn't look like there's that much movement on that side of the border. Now, we've been talking to UNHCR about one of the other border crossings, the Shaman border crossing, about 350 miles south of where I am. This is a huge 1,600-mile border, porous, very mountainous. So we're wondering if actually a lot of people, while this border crossing is fairly quiet, that border crossing, 9,000 people came in yesterday, which is a very rough estimate, but fairly normal for peacetime crossings. We're trying to figure out if actually a lot of people are coming in what the UNHCR calls irregular crossings, so between these official crossings. I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Molly. Let's take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
NBC News reporter Matt Bodner is with us. Hey, Matt, good morning.
Savannah, Joe, good morning. Well, let's kick this off today in North Korea, where it's that time of year again. Last night, the North Korean military conducted their annual military parade, this time celebrating the nation's 73rd anniversary. But I have to say, this year's parade was more subdued than we're kind of used to. We usually see a lot of new weapons and such, but all we got this year was goose-stepping soldiers in orange hazmat suits. So analyze that the way you will. Moving on to India now. Authorities have rescued 82 people after two passenger ferries collided on a river in northeastern India. The two vessels actually collided head-on, causing one of them to sink and leaving one person dead. Now, several were feared missing, but authorities say most of the passengers were rescued or swam away to safety. We might still see a little more on the fatality side because there were about 120 passengers estimated between the two ships. And finally, some good news if you are both a fan of Disney's film Frozen and happen to be in London right now in the near future. A stage adaptation of the film officially opened in London's West End last night. The musical is showing at a theater recently restored by composer Andrew Lloyd Webber. Back to you guys.
All right.
That's pretty cool.
He's already here in New York, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
it is, yes.
They all get it now.
Thank you, Matt.
Coming up, keeping their legacy alive.
Yeah, black firefighters killed in the 9/11 attacks being remembered 20 years later. How their deaths are shining a light on an ongoing issue within the New York Fire Department. Next. A new report finds half of LGBTQ workers have experienced job discrimination, and nearly 1 in 10 said they faced it in the last year. Now, examples of discrimination include being passed over for a job, harassed at work, denied a promotion or raise, being excluded from company events, or even fired because of someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. 1 in 5 LGBTQ employees even reported physical harassment, like being punched or beaten up on the job. Researchers at the Williams Institute at UCLA Law School surveyed 935 lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer adults in May. The findings come despite a Supreme Court ruling last year that says federal law forbids job discrimination based on sexual orientation or transgender status. President Biden signed an executive order on his first day in office requiring federal agencies to implement that decision. So some disturbing numbers there, but just a reminder that even with the Supreme Court decision and everything and all the progress that's been made, it is still a huge issue that impacts the LGBTQ community.
That's exactly the word I was going to use, Joe, disturbing. I mean, when you hear half surveyed, I mean, that just really is. Thank you, Joe. Since the September 11th attacks, the Black New York City firefighters who lost their lives have largely been overlooked. MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee shows us the legacy they left behind, including the ongoing fight to bring equality to the largest fire department in America.
Of the 343 firefighters who tragically died on 9/11, 12 were black.
Leon Smith, great guy, always had a big smile on his face.
Captain Paul Washington knew them all.
Captain Vernon Richard, we studied together to become for the captain's exam.
A 33-year veteran of the department, Captain Washington helped recruit, train, and mentor many of them, including Keith Maynard.
That was my friend. I miss Keith.
Washington and Maynard bonded as members of New York's Vulcan Society, an association of black firefighters focused on fighting racial discrimination and building racial equity in the department. Maynard's identical twin, Kevin, remembers their shared mission.
And he and Paul became great friends because they were very passionate about what they were doing.
But just 2 years into his career as a New York firefighter, Keith Maynard was gone, killed along with hundreds of others in the collapse of the Twin Towers.
I was numb, and I couldn't believe it.
Even as the nation mourned together, both Captain Washington and Kevin were struck by the lack of representation in the remembrances.
There was never an image of them throughout the whole deal in 9/11. There wasn't always a picture of him. There's one or two stories, but then it was just forgotten.
For Captain Washington, it was symbolic of a larger problem. People of color make up a majority of New York City's population, but the fire department remains overwhelmingly white.
You know, when you're black on this job, it's just like being black in America. It's difficult. You got to fight to be treated fairly. You got to fight for them to change the policies that kept blacks off of this job for so long.
So Washington focused on the fire department's entrance exam.
There was no way you were going to get on the job in New York if you weren't prepared or if you wasn't exposed to the way the test was given and what to expect.
What was the stance of the city and the fire department?
I mean, we brought these issues to their attention, and they would just blow us off, basically, you know.
The Vulcans and the Department of Justice took their grievances to court, and in 2010, a federal judge ruled that the FDNY used the entrance exam to intentionally discriminate against black and Hispanic applicants, a practice with, quote, deep historical roots. Where are we at now in terms of the diversity of the department?
Well, the numbers have gone up. Blacks now, we're at about 8 or 9%.
Kevin Maynard, now a firefighter in Houston, knows his brother would have been happy to see the changes the Vulcan Society has achieved. Your brother was committed to diversifying the force. Yeah. What's it like for you to come back home and see, you know, brothers and sisters like with that uniform on those engines?
It's twofold, because it's good to see it. So you have that sense of guilt. For me, I think I wanted them to be around to see it.
Now, the city disputed the federal judge's finding that discriminatory practices by the fire department were intentional. But after the election of Mayor Bill de Blasio, city lawyers settled the discrimination suit in 2014, agreeing to hire a chief diversity officer and a diversity advocate who have overseen the biggest gains in recruitment and hiring of people of color in the department's history.
As the 20th anniversary of 9/11 nears, new terror threats are still emerging, including in Afghanistan, now led by a hardline Taliban government.
The threat exists inside Afghanistan, but also beyond, especially as new dangers like cyber attacks are aimed at the U.S. Here's NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell.
A final welcome home in Cleveland today for Navy Corpsman Max Soviak. And in St. Louis, crowds for U.S. Marine Corporal Jared Schmitz, 2 of the 13 service members killed in the Kabul suicide bombing. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the Taliban's new all-male government takes over, with holdovers from the regime that harbored Osama bin Laden and wanted terrorists from the brutal Haqqani network linked to al-Qaeda. This following Taliban assaults against women protesters again today.
The events of the last few days indicate that we are dealing very much with the same old Taliban.
What does that do to the president's rationale for withdrawing our U.S. troops?
The mission of trying to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for terrorism has failed.
At Ramstein today, Secretary of State Blinken saying the U.S. relationship with the Taliban will depend on their actions. But he was challenged by an Afghan journalist.
Journalists are beaten. Women protesters on the streets are beaten. What else do you want to see? Planning for another 9/11?
We will see by its actions whether it corrects course.
Michael Leiter directed the National Counterterrorism Center under Presidents Bush and Obama.
We accomplished a lot of our counterterrorism mission, and we largely kept the American people safe. The question now is, what comes next? And the rise of the Taliban will be a magnet for some.
And there are other growing threats. Russia's aggression, China's militarism, North Korea's nuclear weapons, cyber attacks.
We are living at perhaps a time when we are facing more threats in the world than since the end of World War II.
And then there are the Americans, still trapped in Afghanistan, still with no clear path to escape. Savannah and Joe.
Andrea, thank you so much. And be sure to join us for America Remembers 20 Years Later, a special edition broadcasting live from Ground Zero tomorrow at noon Eastern right here on NBC News Now. Coming up, from Silicon Valley CEO to defendant in a federal fraud trial.
Yeah, we'll take you to court for opening statements in the trial for Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes. You're watching Morning News Now.
The high-profile trial of Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes is officially underway. The one-time Silicon Valley star is accused of defrauding investors and patients with her startup, which was once worth billions of dollars. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has more on the trial's opening arguments.
Elizabeth Holmes facing the test of her life. The 37-year-old arriving in court, her appearance a far cry from the Steve Jobs-inspired black turtleneck she frequently wore as the founder of Theranos, a $9 billion blood testing company the prosecution alleges was based on a lie. This is a case about fraud, about lying and cheating to get money, the prosecutor said. Holmes has been charged with multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud.
We'd like to see a world in which every person gets access to this type of basic testing.
Her promise to revolutionize the way blood is drawn captured popular imagination. Her face splashed across magazines and celebrated as Silicon Valley's most successful self-made female CEO.
I've been so impressed by your dogged determination,
convincing some of the world's wealthiest and most powerful that, thanks to her technology, only a pinprick would be required to conduct hundreds of diagnostic blood tests. The prosecution alleging she used the technology for only a fraction of the actual tests, defrauding not only her investors, but also doctors and patients. Theranos was producing dangerously inaccurate results, the prosecutor said, pointing to faulty tests, including those for pregnancy and cancer, that gave patients the wrong information. Problems the prosecution says she was well aware of. The defense painting a very different picture. Ms. Holmes did not go to work every day intending to lie, cheat, and steal, arguing trying your hardest and coming up short is not a crime. So is Elizabeth Holmes a con artist or simply a failed entrepreneur? What the jury decides could determine if she spends up to 20 years in prison. Joe and Savannah?
All right, Aaron, thank you. Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
And Bertha Coombs is with us this morning. Hey, Bertha.
Hey, good morning, guys. United Airlines says it is going to give employees who have declined to get vaccinated against COVID an extra 5 weeks to comply as the company's deadline approaches at the end of the month. United was the first U.S. airline to issue a vaccine mandate. It says it's going to put workers who get a medical or religious exemption on temporary leave and will look for ways to bring them back with enhanced testing or masking. Meantime, oil giant Royal Dutch Shell is considering a vaccine mandate as well for its employees and whether to fire those who refuse to comply. The Financial Times reports that Shell is outlining a case for a selective mandate, initially for those who are working at offshore platforms and other remote locations where staffers work and live in very close quarters and where approved vaccines are available. An internal memo says that while all reasonable efforts would be made to avoid termination, Shell could be faced with no alternative. And Twitter is taking a page from its competitors. It's going to start to test what it calls communities, its first dedicated space for groups. They're similar to a subreddit or public group on Facebook focused on specific topics. Members can post tweets to a group timeline. Each community has its own moderators who set rules, and users must be invited by an existing member or moderator to participate. Twitter says some of the first communities will focus on popular topics like skincare, astrology, sneakers, and dogs. And I don't want to get in trouble here. I'm pretty sure there's probably going to be a cat page as well. You know, there's cat people. They're
definitely
also
on the internet.
Very dedicated.
There are lots of cat people
Sure,
on the
very
internet.
popular.
Yeah.
Twitter meow.
Okay. Thanks, Martha. And Joe. A statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee was removed yesterday after it towered over Richmond, Virginia for more than a century. For many, that statue was a symbol of inequality and division. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster has more.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. Well, this is a sight that people here in Richmond, Virginia are waking up to this morning. For the first time in more than 130 years, that massive statue honoring Robert E. Lee no longer in place, and it came after what was an emotional day.
Tonight, a sight not seen in more than a century. The largest remaining Confederate statue in America, honoring Civil War General Robert E. Lee, taken down.
We were ecstatic, you know, we all screamed to the top of our lungs.
10 days after the murder of George Floyd last year, and amid calls for racial justice across the country, Virginia's Governor Ralph Northam ordered the statue be removed.
To have these statues that were really put up for the purpose of refighting the Civil War, they shouldn't be there. They're divisive.
But the action was stalled in court battles for more than a year. Last week, the Virginia Supreme Court unanimously cleared the way.
So your view of the statue changed over time?
Yes, absolutely.
How so?
First I thought, well, this is Richmond history, for whatever that's worth. And then I felt like it's time. It needs to go.
The mayor calls today a defining moment.
It is a symbol. It's an inanimate object of bronze and granite, but symbols matter.
But some say the statue was a tribute to history.
Still part of our history, whether good or bad, and it is just sad to see him come down after growing up with him always here.
A community reckoning with a painful past, focusing on the future.
And guys, you see that pedestal still stands there today. That will stay there until the community decides what it wants to do with this entire area. But we'll see workers go ahead and go inside of it, removing what historians believe is a time capsule. Local leaders saying they will replace that time capsule with artifacts reflecting the moment in time we're in today. Guys?
Wow. All right, Shaq, thank you so much.
During the pandemic, a New Jersey teacher spent her days tracking down students who stopped showing up to her virtual classroom.
Yeah, now that teacher is going the extra mile again to welcome students back to school. NBC News correspondent Rahima Ellis has more on her dedication and persistence.
I'm so happy you're here. Jawicki Floyd has been prepping her students for weeks for a return to in-person learning.
But this is yours too, right?
What is it about Mrs. Floyd that keeps you engaged in school?
She makes me feel good, and it makes me want to come back to school.
And after months of pandemic learning, students wanting to return to the classroom is music to this Newark English teacher's ears. With most of her students living in neighborhoods with spotty Wi-Fi or homes where they feared turning on cameras, at times only 3 of her 15 students showed up for online class. It was a nationwide problem. Studies estimate overall, students lost up to 9 months of learning in math and a whole year for students of color. But at a time of loss, Floyd's made it her mission to make students feel found. When we spent a day with her in the spring, we watched her track down missing students, texting, calling, paying home visits.
Why are you doing that? Children are important first. If their well-being, their mindset isn't right, then we're not going to have a society in the future. Not on this side of town anyway.
And I don't want you to give up. Floyd succeeded in getting all but a few students back to her virtual classroom. This year, she's determined to get them back to physical classrooms.
People tell me you can't save all of the children, and I just disagree. I believe I can save 100%.
A can-do attitude to keep her young flock in school. Rahima Ellis, NBC News, Newark, New Jersey.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.